Sean Hook's Newsmaker Saturday starts now.
Thanks for joining us on Newsmaker Saturday. It's been 2 weeks since the Hamas terrorists launched a surprise attack on innocent Israeli civilians in Gaza. Hamas militants flew paragliders from Gaza and used bulldozers to poke gaping holes in a barrier fence to gain access to Israeli territory, killing more than 1,400 people, seizing at least 100 hostages. There are dead Americans. There are Americans being held hostage as well. The Islamist group has long been active in Gaza. That's a tiny Palestinian enclave located on the Mediterranean Sea, hemmed in by Israel and Egypt. It also maintains a presence in the West Bank. Shanna Fuld is a journalist, host of the Israel Daily News podcast. She joins me now from Tel Aviv. This has just been an amazing period of time this last 2 weeks, and no one saw this coming.
That's true. Even the Israelis didn't see it coming, which I know has left so many locals and citizens just feeling unprotected in the one place around the world that we're supposed to feel the most protected, which is Israel, the protector of the Jewish people. And by the way, thank you for having me on the program.
Shanna, it's a pleasure to have you on. Where were you when you first heard news that this was unfolding 2 weeks ago?
So actually, a little bit more than, yeah, you're right. So we're getting close to 2 weeks, but it was 2 Saturdays ago that I was actually at synagogue. I am a Sabbath observing Jew, which means that I don't use my cell phone on Saturdays or Friday night going into Saturday when the sun goes down. And so I woke up on a Saturday morning. I actually completely slept through the sirens that woke most people up at 6:30 in the morning. I slept through those, woke up, got ready for synagogue. I had no idea what was unfolding. On my walk to synagogue, the streets were pretty empty. And I remember thinking that it was a bit strange, but I thought, hey, maybe Tel Aviv is clear and people are just out of the city visiting friends and family, because not only was it the Sabbath, but it was also something called Simchat Torah, which is a very holy and joyous day for the Jewish people. And it also signifies the end of the autumn holiday season that we have, which is a long season. And so it was a day that we were supposed to be celebrating, starting the Torah over from the beginning. And I got to synagogue and people were so happy to see me. And they said, we're happy to see you, especially with everything that's going on. And well, there's always a lot going on in Israel. So I said, thank you very much. And it took some time for me to really understand what had happened. People had not been in the synagogue as much as usual. And within about an hour, I started to understand what was going on. And as the day rolled out, the more people that had access to the phone that I came across, the more I understood. But I really didn't understand the ramifications of it until I turned my phone on when the sun went down. And I knew I was bracing myself for the news that was to come, because I knew that there had been an attack. I just didn't really quite understand the magnitude of it.
Shanna, people have likened this to our 9/11, but people in Israel say it's far worse. If you look at the loss of life compared to the population, it's even a bigger percentage lost. This is horrific, and I don't know where we go from here. Can you give me a sense of the mood in Israel, the sense of Israelis looking at what's to come here and bracing for this? I mean, this is a constant threat where you live, and I'm not sure a lot of Americans understand that this is such a compact geographical area where you have people hostile all around you.
Absolutely. I'm really glad that you brought that comment up. The Jewish people have been dealing with some form of this kind of violence since the beginning of time. And I think that the locals that I'm speaking with, the general idea is we thought that this had been eradicated. We thought that the rampant anti-Semitism, that the Jew hatred was something that we all left behind with World War II. And so I am having an outpouring of fears from people that I never would have expected to be scared in this way. And what I mean by that is I have fellow journalists, American journalists, that are calling me on a daily basis, asking me, what's next? Should I return back to New York? I have a few New Yorker friends. I'm from New York. Should
Yes,
I
from
return back
Queens.
to New York? Is it safe for me to be here? So I want to go through a couple of things that you said. The first point that you mentioned about the feeling on the ground. I just finished a number of interviews with different people from Israeli society. I had two that really stood out to me. The first one was the cousin of a young woman named Amit Man. She was a 22-year-old paramedic who was on a kibbutz in the south that was overrun by Hamas. And she was actually in a dental clinic doing her paramedic duties. She spent the entire day, about 6 or 7 hours, dealing with people coming into the clinic while a security guard and officer stood guard in front of the clinic, quite literally fending off Hamas terrorists while she was inside patching people up and stopping the blood from coming out. Okay, so her cousin described himself to me. He's a gay individual from the theater community here in Israel. He told me he's been a pacifist. He is a seeker of peace and a humanitarian, and he's very progressive and on the left. And he told me this experience has changed the way that he sees humanity, has changed the way that he experiences his neighbors. Similarly, I just got off the phone with a woman who's doing animal rescue. She just came from the south of Israel, where she told me that some 300 cows were shot up, and that she came to do animal rescue and she saw dogs and animals that had been massacred. So we are not talking about loss of life in a wartime way, which is when two armies are at war with one another. We're talking about heinous individual assaults from individual Hamas terrorists coming to individual Israelis face to face with knives and guns and grenades. So the people of Israel, it's scary because the left-wing people of Israel are turning to me and telling me that they feel more conservative and more anti-peace than they've ever felt in their lives. That's one. And two, the second part that you asked me about, how people are just feeling unprotected. And in terms of the 9/11, it being worse, the thing is that Israel has about 9 million, between 9 and 10 million people, and about 7.5 are Jews. So we all know someone who is affected. There's 1,400 people that are dead, and there are 4,000 who were injured. So we all have some connection to this, and it's pretty immediate.
You lived in Queens. You left 5 years ago. Your father was a Holocaust survivor. Is that correct?
No, my father was not a Holocaust survivor. My grandfather did come to Astoria, Queens from Germany as a little boy, escaping the very early beginning stages of the Holocaust. But thank God, no, my father is a Brooklyn-born native.
Okay, I picked that up off a CBS report that was on the wire, and I was just like, wow, the timing is a little different because your father, you're too young for that. But at any rate, this history, it permeates everything with the Jews, because the battle to try to just establish 1949, obviously, but moving forward, it is rarely seen extended periods of peace. There's always something flaring up. And do you suspect that there really is no peace, that you will never achieve that goal because of the environment you're in?
I'm really glad that you asked that question. I think that it's really difficult for Americans today to possibly understand what we're dealing with. And what I mean by that is, thankfully, and I'm an American, we have this positive feeling. We have these deeply ingrained values that I actually didn't realize were a part of my values until I came to Israel and I started to experience other kinds of values. And Israelis and Americans do share a lot of values, and there are different values. So the pursuit of liberty and happiness and freedom that Americans have can sometimes prevent us from possibly understanding how there could be an evil force like Hamas that could possibly come in, rape our women, drag them into Gaza through underground tunnels that they have constructed in order to carry out terror attacks. It is difficult to imagine a grandmother who survived atrocities from generations ago being taken into Gaza, being murdered on a live feed, and then for that video to be published on her own personal uh, Facebook page using her personal cell phone so that her relatives would open up their Facebook app and see that that is the first thing that they would see in the app. It's really hard for Americans to understand that. And the reason for that is because most of us, I don't think, have hate in our hearts, and we don't really have a common enemy as Americans. And there are so many Israelis that don't think of Palestinians or the Arab world as enemies. And in fact, we have peace deals with so many nations, and it's really an exciting time for Israel diplomatically with the Arab world. That being said, do I think that there is potential for peace? I'm a huge believer that there is potential for peace, but I think that it must be executed in a different way that has not been executed before. The world order, as it stands right now, it's a man's world. It's warfare. It's exerting power. This is the language of the Middle East. The language of the Middle East is using your elbow to get in the front of the line. It's making sure that you and your family get first because there might not be anything left. And there's a lot of competitiveness, and there's an assertion of power, and a lot of that comes through violence. I believe that the world order is going to be run by women in the future. I believe women need to take leadership roles. Women bring life into the world. They understand how precious life is. They spend 9 months carrying a baby, birthing it. There's no one that really understands that like women do. And I think that there just needs to be a new world order. There needs to be education. Everything needs to be coming from an internal place. We can get rid of every Hamas operative, but we'll never get rid of the Hamas charter or the Hamas idea. And that's what we really need to be fighting.
Let me ask you about that, because Benjamin Netanyahu, your prime minister, said he's pledged to defeat Hamas, saying that we have to wipe them off the face of the earth. There is no ambiguity there. He's saying it's all or nothing. And as of the day of this taping, the ground forces have not moved in. Can you explain why?
So many of us are not clear why the ground forces have not entered. I will tell you personally, I'm very, very, very relieved that that has not happened. And that is specifically because my baby cousin, who is 18 years old, is on that front line waiting on the other side of the border with his troops. And every day that they don't go in means another day of peace of mind for me. I am not certain why those ground forces haven't entered. I am going to tell you what we do know. We do know that the IDF is clearing out the border on both sides. They're making Israelis leave on the Israeli side of the border. They're making Gazans leave on the other side of the border, or at least they're asking them to. Hamas has told them not to do it. The world is looking at this and they're saying, oh my goodness, Israel is ethnically cleansing the land by pushing Gazans out. What's going to happen next? And the rest of us, or at least here, we understand how it works. The Israeli army is trying to eliminate as many civilian casualties as possible. And the idea is that by moving Gazans out of the way, they'll be able to identify the exact Hamas terrorists that they would like to remove.
That's a tall order.
So this is what we do know.
That's a tall order to try to, I mean, they may not be wearing battlefield garb. It's going to be very hard to identify the terrorist from the citizen.
Absolutely, it will be.
So as you watch this unfold, the political part of this, do Israelis feel the U.S. has their back? Have you been satisfied with the U.S. response so far? Do you feel like we are keeping up our end of the bargain as well?
I think that the United States has never had a bolder, more pronounced stance than this. Israelis and Jews around the globe were talking at the Shabbat dinner table about what President Biden said in his speech. He made a very powerful speech. It was, as quoted from an individual that I got for an article that I wrote, everything an American or Israeli or Jew anywhere needed to hear. Now, let's move past what he said because he gave a beautiful, compelling speech. Actually, let's give it a little bit of emphasis. He did not talk about both sides. He did not talk about Israel's right to exist, which is difficult because what nation that exists, especially a nation for 75 years, still needs to discuss whether it has the right to exist or not. So whenever we hear politicians talking about Israel has the right to defend itself, it almost sounds like we're back at 1948, deciding if we're going to be an independent state or not. Now, moving past that speech that he gave that was so powerful, the fact that he is here in Israel, that Secretary of State Antony Blinken was here in Israel, and the fact that there are carriers off of the Eastern Mediterranean, and that there's going to be a discussion about wartime efforts tomorrow, it is the biggest display of support from the United States that I think the Jewish people may have ever gotten in our history of being allies. And in addition to that, I think that this is genuinely a fight for humanity. And I think that's why the United States is taking such a stand, because I think the US is saying, we just looked evil in its face and we don't want this anywhere else, not in Israel, not anywhere. And that's why I think this is so strong.
You know, I think Americans, a lot of Americans cannot appreciate the compact nature of the geography. Gaza is about 2 million people. It's about, I don't know, 25 miles long, 5 to 7 miles wide. It's a little strip. This would be like, this would be like rockets coming in from Phoenix into Casa Grande. I mean, it's this tight where you have people who want to do you harm. And I wonder, you live with that all the time. And I know because I have friends who've lived in Israel or do live in Israel, and they just live with kind of a gallows humor about going on with their life and what may come, and they just continue to forge ahead. It's incredible.
Absolutely, it is. We all live with this. And I think, again, it's something that Americans have a really hard time to grasp because I just don't think that Americans have enemies that live next door. And when you have an enemy that lives next door, there's always a creeping concern in the back of your mind. I definitely experienced that myself. We have lots of integration of Arabs into our society. We're talking about Arab Israelis, and I am not born and raised here, so my interactions are a little different. I come from a classroom in Queens, New York, where I had a person of every different kind of color and religion in my classroom. So I'm really happy to interact with everybody here, and there are many Israelis that are happy to interact with people here. What a lot of people don't realize is that we have Arab Israeli citizens, and then there are Palestinians. There are Palestinians that live in the West Bank. There are Palestinians that live in Gaza. And so the Palestinians that live in Gaza, there are a large number of them that are coming into Israel to work each day. And you just never know. You can never know. You never know. There have been so many examples in our nation's history. Let's go back actually before the state, 1929 in Hebron, or Hebron in English. This is a place that's really historic for Jews. It's historic for Arabs. And more or less the Jews and the Arabs lived happily side by side in that community, which is today the West Bank. And in 1929, neighbors turned on the Jews. Their Arab neighbors turned on the Jews. There are stories until today from people that say, I remember my neighbor who came to tell me what was spoken at the mosque. And she came to warn our family that there was going to be a pogrom against the Jews. Those stories are still being discussed, and it's almost 100 years later. So we live with this fear, and it's a fear from 1929. It's a fear from always that the Jewish people are hated, and we are always looking over our shoulders.
Yeah, we're going to take a quick break here. Shanna, can you stand by? We're going to take a quick break on Newsmaker Saturday and return with Shanna Fuld from Tel Aviv in a moment. Back with journalist Shanna Fuld from Tel Aviv, Israel. And she, of course, is the host of a terrific podcast, Israel Daily News Podcast. Look it up. It's terrific. Shanna, thank you. You left Queens, New York about 5 years ago, right?
Yes.
You were a little girl when 9/11 happened.
That's right.
Are there any similarities to what you're experiencing right now in Israel and the constant threat and just that unsettled feeling of what's next, what's coming next?
So on 9/11, I was in a public school in Queens, and I remember I've always had a really strong intuition. And I remember that the phone rang in my classroom, and something in my mind told me my mother was here to pick me up. I knew that the call was for me. I don't know why. I still don't know why. And it was. I was correct. My mom had came to pick me up. She took me home. And I remember that we had the TV on for watching the Twin Towers come down on the news. And I remember it being this quiet, global, enormous feeling. The World Trade Center. It's huge. This feeling is a little bit different. I think that this feeling is, first of all, we are next door neighbors with the enemy. They are very close by. And in fact, they actually entered our territory on tractors. They didn't even need to take over a plane or anything like that. They
And
came in on rubber
paragliders.
boats, paragliders and tractors. And so I think the feeling is just being not safe. You know, who's going to come break the door down? Which neighbor is going to flip?
I'm
And I
glad you
think that's
mentioned
the
that because there is some chatter in America among some commentators. What took a really terrific army, Israel, what took them so long to come to the rescue of the people involved in that slaughter at the music festival? Just unbelievable images and horrific statement about humanity. I don't know what to make of that. But what took, is there talk among Israelis about how did we fail and how did we not come to rescue ourselves here?
There is a lot of talk about that from survivors talking about how they were sending messages to family and friends asking them personally to come and rescue. And there were stories of that, of women in my age category in their 20s that were sending messages to cousins or dads and saying, I need you to get in here and rescue me. And there were rescues by family members who made it there before the IDF. This is going to be an enormous investigation. And what I believe is that this was a huge intel fail. In addition to that, the nation has been going through a lot of turmoil politically and amongst ourselves, having a lot of protesting and discussion about what we want our nation to look like in the future and which leaders are going to be the right leaders to bring us into that place. During this time, it's clear that our enemies took an opportunity to take advantage of that. So I don't exactly know what the holdup on the forces were, but I can assure you that once things are figured out on the ground here, there's going to be a large-scale investigation, and the journalists are going to be all over it.
Yep, Shanna Fuld, I appreciate your time from Tel Aviv, Israel. Stay safe. We're also thinking about your brother on the front lines there.
My cousin, thank you so much.
Your cousin. Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Shanna, thank you very much. I appreciate it, and we'll speak again. I hope so.
And I hope so as well. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Shanna. Shanna Fuld from Tel Aviv. We're back in a minute on Newsmaker Saturday. Thanks for joining us on Newsmaker Saturday again. Shanna Fuld from Tel Aviv, Israel. That was a remarkable story. We didn't expect to go the entire program, but we did because her story is compelling. And again, thank you for watching the program. We will see you next week on Newsmaker Saturday.